The blood under my fingernails is still wet. Across the room, the Alpha King turns the key in the bedroom door. A heavy iron click echoes off the walls. I force my lungs to steady. He didn't buy me from the mafia to be his pampered mate. He bought me to be his executioner. The worst part? The sacred mate bond tying my pulse to his is a dirty lie. If the Syndicate finds out, we both die. Chapter 1. The curved silver needle punched through her eyebrow. Vora kept her eyes fixed on the blank wall. The steel table beneath her thighs leached the heat from her skin. Blood dripped, hitting the marble floor with a soft, rhythmic patter. The royal physician hovered. His knuckles were bone white around a glass jar of anesthetic. His hands shook hard enough to rattle the metal instruments on his tray. She snatched the needle from his grip. The glass jar hit the tray with a sharp clatter. "I'll do it myself." She dragged the coarse black thread through the torn flesh. The physician winced, sucking in a sharp breath. Vora didn't make a sound. Down in the underground rings, showing pain, invited a slaughter. She'd clawed her way out of the Syndicate's iron chains. She would survive this sterilized cage. A sharp peppermint cleaners hijacked the air, but they couldn't bury the copper stench of her own blood. She yanked the suture tight. A hiss escaped her teeth. Her fingers dug into the edge of the steel table until the joints popped. In the far corner of the room, King Alaric stood motionless. Shadows clung to his midnight suit. His silver eyes tracked every drag of the needle. He didn't speak, he just watched, the weight of his stare burning into the bare skin of her shoulders. What did Silas whisper to him right before handing over her contract? The question scraped at her skull. A bloodbind tied her pulse to this glacial monarch. If she bolted, the magic would crush her heart. "Leave us." Alaric's voice was a low rumble that rattled the medical cabinets. The physician didn't hesitate. He abandoned the tray and bolted. The heavy door clicked shut, locking them in. Vora slid off the operating table. Her bare heels hit the marble. Torn, grime-soaked wraps clung to her bruised ribs, but she forced her spine straight. She tilted her chin. He stepped out of the shadows. "You didn't need to do that." His tone was dangerously soft. Her jaw tightened. "I don't need your charity. I don't need your doctors. I don't need you." Alaric looked at her blood-stained knuckles. There was no disgust. His pupils dilated, swallowing the silver. The low hum of the air conditioning seemed to fade out, leaving the room suffocatingly hot. His focus drifted from her bruised hands up to her mouth. Vora took a single step back. Her shoulder blades hit the frosted glass of the supply cabinet. He stepped forward. He matched her rhythm, closing the distance until she could taste the sharp winter chill on his skin.
Hours later, the sterile chill of the medical ward gave way to the grit of the underground arena. Solid oak exploded like a gunshot. Dust choked the air. Alaric stumbled backward, his heavy boots skidding across the packed dirt of the fighting ring. Vora closed the distance in a heartbeat. She drove her knee upward. The heavy training staff snapped cleanly over her bone. She lunged. The jagged edge of shattered wood dug straight into the soft skin of his throat. Alaric froze. A cold drop of sweat tracked down his jawline. His pulse hammered against the sharp splinters. He was the apex sovereign. He ruled this kingdom. Yet here he was, paralyzed by a feral outcast, smelling of cheap soap, burnt ozone, and sweat. He looked into her blazing golden eyes. Fire cannot be chained. You leave your left side wide open. Her chest heaved. You fight like a man who expects the whole room to just drop to their knees. He didn't flinch. Beneath the lethal threat of her stare, the dormant ash inside his ribs sparked. For 3 years, his inner beast had been a frozen corpse. The royal bloodline was rotting in his veins. But right now, A deep fire ignited under his sternum. The predator inside him clawed at his ribcage. It recognized her violence. It wanted it. And you fight like someone with absolutely nothing left to lose. The words tore out of him, rough and thick. Vora's pupils flared. The air pressure in the ring plummeted. Static crawled across the dirt. Alaric leaned forward. He deliberately pressed his windpipe deeper into the jagged wood until a drop of warm blood welled up against the splinters. The physical sting grounded him. A low, vibrating hum rattled the floorboards beneath his boots. It was the sound of his own beast rising from the frost. Vora stopped breathing. Her white-knuckled grip trembled on the splintered staff. "Are you out of your mind?" His eyes locked onto hers. "Maybe." The wood dug deeper. "But you woke him up, little bird." She lowered her hands. The shattered oak hit the dirt with a dull thud. She took an unsteady step back, spun on her heel, and vanished into the shadowy stone corridors. Alaric let her go. The silence in the cavern was absolute, broken only by the brutal, thumping rhythm battering his rib cage. He stood motionless in the settling dust. The heavy scent of rain and wildfire hung in the air. For the first time in 1,000 days, he was not a ghost. He dragged his thumb across the bead of blood on his neck. She was going to be his.
Thick glass shattered. Jagged shards rained across the marble floor. Vora jerked back, her spine slamming hard into a metal cabinet. A silver tray crashed down, sending scalpels skittering over the tile. Silence rushed in behind the noise. Then, the sickeningly sweet smell of cheap cologne and burning wax hijacked the air. Silas Vane stood in the ruined doorway. A slick, dead-eyed smile stretched across his face. He held up a heavy vellum scroll sealed with dark, dripping blood wax. He dropped the ownership papers onto the desk. The heavy thud echoed. That scroll meant she was iron, forged to be owned. She had crawled out of the underground fighting pits and outlived Syndicate butchers, but looking at that glowing parchment stripped the steel right out of her bones. The phantom taste of copper and rust flooded her mouth. A memory of a radiator chain from a decade ago tightened around her throat. She locked her jaw. She wouldn't break in front of him. Silas adjusted his tailored cuffs. "Kneel for me, little vulture." Red magic flared inside the wax. Invisible weights slammed into Vora's shoulders, brutally yanking her downward. Her knees hit the glass-covered marble. Sharp shards sliced into her bare skin. She fought the gravity, grinding her teeth until she tasted fresh blood. The heavy oak doors tore off their hinges. Alaric breached the room. His silver eyes locked onto her bleeding knees. He didn't speak. He didn't issue a royal decree. He just lunged. His massive frame eclipsed the sunlight. He put his back to the Syndicate boss, absorbing the invisible kinetic whip intended for her spine. The magic detonated against his chest. Alaric dropped to one knee. His bare skin ground into the shattered glass right beside her. Vora froze. Sovereigns didn't bleed for Syndicate assets. Rulers didn't take a knee for the condemned. Alaric dragged in a ragged breath. His tailored shirt ripped down the shoulder seam. Searing energy arced across his skin. Not the Syndicate's wicked red, but a freezing, luminescent blue. Silas let out a dry, rattling chuckle. He picked up his glowing vellum and strolled out the shattered doorway. The ringing in her ears faded, leaving only the harsh scrape of Alaric's breathing. Vora stayed on the floor. She reached out, her trembling fingers hovering an inch over his bleeding shoulder. The gilded cage was gone. This was a war zone, and the king was bleeding for her. She pulled her hand back and closed it into a tight fist. "Oh, next time," she whispered to the empty room. "I'll drown him in it."
It took until midnight for the adrenaline of the ambush to fade. driving Alaric deep into the palace bowels to track her chaotic scent. Orange sparks rained across the dark armory. Alaric stood perfectly still in the arched doorway. He listened to the harsh, rhythmic scrape of carbon steel sliding against a grinding wheel. The air down here was thick with the bite of metallic rust, heavy gun oil, and her. Vora hunched over the heavy stone wheel. She dragged a jagged hunting knife across the coarse grit. Grime-soaked bandages wrapped her hands, but fresh crimson was already blooming through the white fabric. She pressed the steel down with white-knuckled desperation, her shoulders locked tight against the memory of the Syndicate boss. He stepped out of the gloom. Letting the heavy darkness roll off his shoulders, he moved closer. He stopped when his chest was mere inches from her back. Gently, he reached out and covered her bloody fingers with his own massive hands. A sharp breath tore through her lips, but she didn't pull away. "Let go," he ordered, his voice a low, vibrating rumble. He pried the coarse whetstone from her trembling grip. Taking the weapon, he angled the steel against the spinning wheel. The frantic, desperate scraping shifted into a smooth, steady glide. The hiss of steel devouring stone echoed through the empty armory. An obsessive urge roared to life beneath his ribs. He wanted to lock her away. He wanted to slaughter anything that dared cast a shadow over her. But he forced the violent instinct down. He had to earn the trust of a survivor before he could court a queen. He closed the remaining fraction of distance. His solid chest brushed against the rigid line of her spine. Her frantic pulse vibrated against his skin, fast and panicked. They stayed like that, anchored by the hypnotic sound of the grinding wheel. Slowly, her heart rate decelerated until it matched his own heavy rhythm. The iron fortress around her finally cracked in the dark. Vora exhaled a ragged breath. She leaned back, just an inch, letting her exhaustion rest against the immovable strength of his body. Alaric wiped the blade clean on his slacks. He offered the weapon back to her. Her calloused fingertips grazed his palm as she took the handle. A catastrophic shockwave detonated from that microscopic touch. Raw energy tore through his veins, ripping the dormant predator inside him wide awake. It slammed against his ribs, unleashing a fury that demanded absolute ownership. The kinetic blast radiated outward into the stone room. The heavy, reinforced armory windows abruptly exploded. A million jagged diamonds rained out into the freezing night. Alaric spun Vora around and yanked her into his chest. His eyes burned a blinding, lethal silver. He crushed her against his pounding heart as the glass fell around them. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in the smell of rain, absolutely ready to burn the city to ash for her.
Solid oak exploded inward. Jagged splinters shredded the air. Vora hit the marble floor, rolling hard behind a shattered pillar. Her lungs burned. Through the ruined glass of the foyer, a blood-red sunset bled into the room. Silas Vane walked through the wreckage. 20 armed soldiers flanked him. The heavy stench of gunpowder and burning copper rolled in off their boots. The Syndicate boss didn't carry a weapon. Instead, he raised the heavy vellum scroll. He chanted something low and ancient, the syllables scraping his throat. The parchment ignited with a sick, crimson light. Invisible iron clamped around Vora's windpipe. A wet gasp tore from her lips. She crashed to the freezing tile as every muscle in her body locked tight. It felt like boiling acid replacing her blood. She clawed at her own throat, dragging in useless, empty air. "Mox, kill the Sovereign." Silas aimed a manicured finger at Alaric. Vora's bones moved without her permission. Her fingertips twitched, brushing the leather hilt of her knife. Her spine snapped straight. Across the room, 4 massive enforcers slammed Alaric to the stone. He tore at their grip. His silver eyes were wild, locked onto her, desperate to close the distance. But her mind was still hers. It was fiercely awake. A severed electrical conduit dangled from the cracked plaster nearby. Blue sparks spat into the concrete dust. The bloodbind lasts a lifetime. So, end the lifetime. She bit her tongue hard enough to flood her mouth with copper. Fighting the crushing gravity of the magic, she wrenched her arm away from the steel at her hip. She threw her body sideways. Her bare hands clamped around the live wire. Thousands of volts tore into her flesh. White-hot agony erased the world. Her spine bowed backward as the crimson magic violently collided with the blue electricity. The foundation of the room cracked. The vellum scroll burst into flames. It rained down over the soldiers as useless grey ash. The contract vanished. Her heartbeat flatlined. Her body hit the marble with a dull thud. Across the wreckage, Alaric stopped fighting the guards. He froze, staring at her lifeless frame. The air pressure in the room plummeted to zero, leaving a deafening, terrifying vacuum in the wake of her choice.
Dead silence smothered the foyer. The metallic scent of her blood was entirely swallowed by the suffocating stench of burnt wiring. A devastating ripple of pure force erupted from Alaric's chest. The four enforcers launched backward, their skulls cracking against the stone walls with a sickening crunch. Silas abandoned his victory. He scrambled over the rubble and fled into the dark. Alaric didn't look at the retreating coward. He completely abandoned the defense of his crown. His knees slammed into the concrete dust right beside Vora. No. He grabbed her wrists. No, no. Her skin was the color of winter frost. He pressed his fingers deep into her flesh. But there was nothing. Not a single flutter of a pulse. He ripped a pressurized syringe of synthetic adrenaline straight from her tactical belt. His hands forged to sign treaties and execute traitors, shook violently as he tore off the cap. He positioned the thick steel needle over her sternum. He drove it straight down. Locking his hands together, he slammed his entire body weight against her chest. Bone crunched under his palms. He struck again. Come back. He closed his eyes. He forced his newly awakened alpha power down his trembling arms. He shoved his own life force directly into her shattered ribs, ready to drain every drop of blood in his veins to keep her tethered to this world. Liquid silver light bled from his bare palms. It sank deep into her freezing skin, illuminating her veins. The only sound in the room was the faint, sputtering hiss of the severed wire. Then, Vora's spine arched off the marble. A ragged, desperate gasp tore through her lungs. Her eyelids snapped open. The irises were no longer a feral gold. They were a blinding, swirling vortex of stolen silver. Alaric collapsed back into the dust. The frantic rush of CPR gave way to the harsh, beautiful drag of her newly functioning lungs. Vora slowly sat up. Silver electricity crackled across her scarred knuckles as she tilted her head. She locked her glowing eyes onto his. Alaric realized the truth instantly. He was entirely at her mercy. The sun breached the horizon, but the nightmare of the night before still stained the palace walls.
Freezing marble bit into the raw blisters on Vora's heels. She walked through the splintered wooden doors of the throne room. Dawn sunlight sliced through the thick, grey dust hanging in the air. Her sternum throbbed. It was a deep, heavy ache, right where the electricity had literally stopped her heart. She adjusted the grime-soaked wraps around her ribs and forced her spine straight. Silver energy hummed beneath her skin. It vibrated through her veins like a live wire. She kept her eyes locked on the towering golden throne. Alaric stood beside the dais. His ruined midnight suit was caked in concrete dust and her dried blood. The Queen Mother's elite guards backed away, practically crawling into the shadowy corners of the room as she approached. Alaric didn't move. He just smiled. It was a dark, unhinged look that sent a spike of adrenaline straight through her system. Silas escaped into the city. His voice was a gravelly rasp in the quiet room. Vora closed the distance between them. She reached out, her bruised fingers wrapped firmly around his warm hand. She didn't ask. She just slid the heavy gold signet ring right off his index finger. The metal was freezing. She turned to the mahogany desk, dragging a piece of crisp parchment to the center of the blotting pad. She grabbed a burning brass candle. Hot crimson wax dripped onto the white paper. Vora slammed the king's ring directly into the boiling puddle. An execution order for the Valerius Syndicate, sealed in fire. A sharp gasp echoed from the doorway. A royal advisor stood there, clutching his silk collar. Vora turned. Blinding liquid silver flooded her eyes. The advisor instantly dropped to his knees. His jaw trembled. "We are cleaning house." The words rattled the tall glass windows. Alaric laughed. The dark, chest-deep sound washed over the room. He made no attempt to ask for his ring back. Instead, he stepped up right behind her shoulder. The tether between them snapped into place, hot and heavy. He wasn't a handler holding a leash. He was standing in the blood-soaked dirt with her. Vora plucked the gold ring from the cooling wax. The entire kingdom rested right in the palm of her hand. She tossed the priceless metal onto the marble floor. It bounced with a sharp, echoing clink. "Keep up, Your Highness." She wiped a fresh smear of blood from her jaw. "We have a mafia boss to hunt." She turned her back on the golden throne and marched out the splintered doorway. The smell of incoming rain and dirty steel called to her from the city below. She cracked her knuckles, silver energy sparking at her fingertips.
Combat boots hammered against damp cobblestones. Alaric followed Vora down the claustrophobic spiral of the palace tunnels. The underground air reeked of rotting fish and stale ammonia. The sterilized safety of the obsidian wing was gone. They were plunging directly into the throat of the lower city. Vora moved with terrifying speed. Alaric pushed his muscles to the breaking point just to track her wake. The newly forged tether burned between their chests like hot iron. Silas Vane actually believed he could steal from a king and survive the night. The mafia boss was already a dead man. A rusted iron security door blocked the end of the tunnel. The underground blood pits, her former prison. Vora didn't hesitate at the stench of old trauma. She raised her heel and kicked the center of the steel. The door ripped off its hinges. It hit the packed dirt arena with a deafening boom. Dust and stale tobacco smoke hung in the air. 30 armed Syndicate enforcers stared back at them. Burning cigarettes slipped from open mouths. Alaric stepped shoulder to shoulder with her. He let the blinding silver glow flood his own eyes, matching hers. The royal leash was gone, and every criminal in this dirt ring was about to find out. "Where is Silas?" Alaric's roar rattled the dust from the wooden rafters. 3 enforcers dropped to the dirt, clutching their bleeding ears. One towering guard didn't drop. He ripped a sawed-off shotgun from his trench coat. The heavy pump racked. He aimed the black barrel straight at Vora's chest. Vora didn't blink. She casually raised her blood-stained hand. A concussive shockwave erupted from her bare fingertips. The invisible sledgehammer slammed into the gunman. He flew backward through the smoky air, his spine cracking hard against a wooden support beam. The shotgun hit the mud. The explosive echo rolled through the underground. Then, dead silence. The remaining soldiers scrambled backward. Knives and blades hit the dirt in sheer panic. "I won't ask twice," Vora whispered. A trembling runner pointed a shaking finger toward the smuggling tunnels. "The docks." He choked on the words. "He's boarding a cargo ship." Vora didn't give them another look. She pivoted and launched herself into the pitch-black exit. Pride flared in Alaric's chest. He stepped into the dark after her, racking the slide of his own weapon. He was going to watch her paint the shipping docks in Syndicate blood.
Freezing rain hammered her face. The harbor air was thick with the smell of brine and spilled motor oil. Vora crouched on top of a rusted shipping container. Below her, black water battered the wooden pilings. The freezing steel leached the heat from her bare feet. But she didn't care. She just wanted Silas Vane dead. 3 Syndicate enforcers stepped out of the fog. Heavy chains dragged across the wet concrete. Vora didn't wait. She launched herself off the 30-foot drop. She hit the largest enforcer knee first. Bones snapped under the impact. His sternum caved and he crumpled into the freezing mud. He didn't move. 2 iron chains whistled toward her head. She dropped into a fluid crouch. The metal whipped harmlessly past. Pivoting on her heel, she drove her elbow straight up into the second man's jaw. Blood sprayed into the rain. She turned, ready for the third, but stopped. A bright red royal crest marked a massive cargo crate on the dock. From inside the box, a desperate, muffled whine rattled against the wood. Footsteps clanked on metal. Silas Vane walked down the ship's ramp. A slick grin stretched across his face. He stopped and clapped his hands. The sound was dull in the downpour. "Good little fighter," Silas called out. "But you're no sovereign." He leveled a black pistol directly at the trembling wooden crate. "Did you really think I was just running away?" Vora's throat locked. The phantom smell of the fighting pits, blood and burning hair, flashed in her memory. She wasn't going to let another innocent burn to ash. Silver ignited in her eyes. "Pull it!" The storm raged around them. "Pull the trigger," she warned. "Sen, and I'll rip your throat out with my bare hands." The silence between them stretched, filled only by the rhythmic pounding of the rain. Vora shifted her weight, locking her muscles into a lethal spring. Silas just smiled. He thumbed the heavy hammer of the pistol back. Click.
A crowbar swung for Alaric's head. He ducked. The rusted iron smashed into the brick wall behind him, showering orange sparks into the freezing rain. Alaric stepped inside the attacker's guard and drove his fist deep into the man's gut. The enforcer dropped into the muddy water, gasping for air. Alaric wiped the rain from his eyes. Over the sound of the crashing waves, he heard Vora's threat. That violent, unyielding defiance flared inside his own chest. 4 more Syndicate soldiers charged down the rusted metal ramp. Silver blades cut through the heavy fog. Alaric sprinted across the slick concrete, sliding to a halt right beside her. Their shoulders brushed. The electric shock of the mate bond spiked through his wet clothes. She didn't look at him. The freezing rain plastered dark hair against the bruises on her cheekbone. "I've got the 4 on the left," Alaric said, his voice a low rumble cutting under the wind. "You take the snake." Silas let out a hollow laugh. "Romantic. The broken king and his fake little mate." The Syndicate boss stepped forward and kicked his polished shoe against the splintering wood of the cargo crate. "Tell her the truth, Alaric." Silas kept his gun aimed at the box. "Tell her what your mother actually did." The rain suddenly felt like ice against Alaric's skin. The toxic secret buried inside the royal vault clawed its way to the surface. It was a calculated lie, engineered years ago to cage her bloodline. Vora turned her head. The silver in her eyes flickered. "Alaric? What is he talking about?" Before he could answer, chains rattled inside the broken crate. A man stumbled blindly out into the rain. He was emaciated, covered in scars. But the face was unmistakable. It was her father. The man everyone believed died in the underground pits 10 years ago. All the color drained from Vora's face. Her fingers opened. Her heavy steel knife plummeted. It hit the concrete with a loud, ringing clang. Silas racked the slide of the pistol. He pressed the barrel right against the old man's temple. "Kneel, little bird." Silas smiled. Or he dies. The fight completely vanished from her eyes. Alaric watched his fiercely independent equal shatter right in front of him. He didn't hesitate. He stepped squarely into the line of fire, eclipsing her with his own body.
Wind-driven rain lashed Vora's face. She didn't blink. Her father stood on the decaying wood. The feral ruler of the fighting pits wasn't dead. 10 years of mourning vanished in the span of a single heartbeat. Heavy iron chains bound his emaciated wrists. He swayed on starved legs. Silas jammed the black barrel of a pistol against the old man's temple. Vora couldn't move. The winter storm battered her shoulders. She turned her head just an inch. Alaric stood rigidly beside her. His silver eyes were wide, fractured with pure panic. The truth hit her like a physical blow. The royal blood bond was a fraud. Her entire reality was a calculated lie. She had bled for nothing. On the dock, the chained captive slowly raised his head. Cloudy golden eyes locked onto hers. A decade of syndicate torture hadn't killed the fire in his skull. A deep, chest-rattling vibration ripped from his throat. The sound shook the wet timber. It wasn't a plea for mercy. It was a command. Burn them. Vora didn't drop. She forced her spine straight. Silas buried the muzzle deeper into the old man's grey hair. "Kneel!" he shrieked over the crashing waves, or his brain paints the water. The crashing rain seemed to fade. A dark hum started deep in Vora's chest, clawing its way up her throat. She threw her head back. She laughed. The sound belonged entirely to the underground fighting pits, raw and blood-soaked. The 3 Syndicate enforcers physically recoiled. Blinding electricity detonated across her skin. If you can't sever the chain, incinerate the anchor. Vora raised both glowing fists. She drove her bare knuckles directly into the rotting timber. The dock exploded. Splintered planks launched upward in a brutal geyser of wood and rust. Silas shrieked as the ground vanished beneath his polished shoes. The pistol discharged blindly into the rain. Vora dove straight into the flying debris. She wasn't playing royalty anymore. Her bruised hands clamped around her father's freezing iron chains, right as the floor evaporated beneath her boots. The black ocean swallowed them.
Solid ground ceased to exist. Alaric plunged into the churning abyss. The freezing water shocked his system, driving the air from his lungs. 4 armed enforcers crashed into the current around him, thrashing blindly in the dark. Alaric ignored them. The royal prophecy was a lie, but the obsessive fire consuming his ribs was terrifyingly real. He kicked through the sinking timber, brine stinging his eyes. A heavy boot slammed into his ribs, hands clamped around his ankle, dragging him down. Alaric twisted in the water. He drove his heel directly into the attacker's throat. The grip dissolved. His lungs screamed. He breached the violent surface, dragging a ragged gasp of stormy air into his chest. He wiped the freezing brine from his face. 10 yards away, Silas was scrambling up a surviving support piling. The Syndicate boss coughed up seawater, clinging to the rotting wood. To his left, Vora erupted from the waves. She choked on the water, hauling her chained father onto a massive floating shipping crate. Pride hit Alaric like a physical blow. He surged through the black water and hauled his heavy frame onto the splintering wood beside her. His hands instantly locked onto the old man's iron chains. He strained against the cold metal, desperate to snap it. Vora lifted her head. Her eyes burned with fractured betrayal and devastating doubt. Alaric spat salt water from his lips. He didn't offer a royal decree or an excuse. The prophecy was a lie. He held her gaze. But I chose you anyway. Above them, Silas aimed the black pistol down from his wooden perch. Blood streamed from a gash on the mafia boss's forehead. In his other hand, he held a small, glowing vial of cracked blue glass. Goodbye, Your Highness, he screamed over the thunder. Alaric let go of the chains. He surged to his feet on the rocking crate. He stepped squarely in front of them, entirely eclipsing Vora and her father from the line of sight. He locked his eyes on the barrel of the gun, ready to take the bullet.
Alaric offered his throat to a loaded gun. A liar, trading his life for hers. The rain hit the docks in sheets. Silas's arm snapped forward. The glowing blue vial sliced through the downpour, a spinning bullet of cracked glass. It didn't aim for Alaric. The trajectory locked dead, onto the rusted iron crate rocking on the black waves, onto her chained, starving father. Vora shoved Alaric out of the way. Her boots slipped against the wet timber. She threw her weight forward, planted her feet, and caught the crosshairs with her own chest. Glass shattered against her collarbone. Chemical fire detonated in her veins. From high on the piling, Silas erupted into manic, jagged laughter. The sound bled into the storm. The transition hit her. It wasn't natural. Her bones felt like boiling steel. A raw scream ripped her throat apart. She dropped to the splintered wood, fingers curling, nails digging into the rusted iron. Rainwater mixed with the blood in her mouth. She swallowed it down. The Syndicate loved their chemical torture. She knew the metallic sting of underground syringes. She'd outlived their cages, and she would survive this. Her bloodline answered the poison. It hijacked it. Her spine snapped. The wet crack echoed louder than the thunder. Thick, silver-tipped fur tore through her skin. Her fingernails stretched, hardening into steel-rending scythes. The human shell finally broke apart. A roar tore from her chest, deep enough to vibrate the water. She rose, massive, a towering shadow of silver and teeth. Up on the piling, Silas choked. The laughter died in his throat. He went completely pale. Vora coiled her hind legs. The muscles bunched, cut tight like a steel spring. She launched 40 feet up into the storm. Silas emptied his magazine. Bullets flattened against her silver hide like raindrops. She hit the wooden pillar. Her jaws clamped down on the heavy fabric of his trench coat, and with a sharp jerk of her neck, she ripped him from the edge. Silas screamed. It was a high, thin sound. They hit the black water together. The ocean swallowed the noise. She dragged him down, deep into the crushing pressure, holding him under until his lungs filled with the sea. He wouldn't touch this city again. The violent churn of the water slowly smoothed out. Vora broke the surface. Salt burned her throat. The storm was fading into a low rumble. She kept her silver eyes on the sinking wreckage below. Hungry?
The storm broke. An ash-gray dawn washed over the ruined docks. Alaric knelt in the wet sand. He pulled a thick wool blanket over Vora's bare shoulders, his heavy hands lingering on the damp fabric. She had shed the silver beast beneath the waves. Now, she was just human, bruised, exhausted, and freezing. Up on the pavement, her father rested in the back of a royal transport. Safe, but the lie still hung between them. It felt heavy in the salt-drenched air. Vora stared out at the black tide. Her jaw was set tight. She didn't look at him. The ocean lapped rhythmically against the broken wood. The Queen Mother lied about the prophecy, Alaric said. The words scraped out of his chest. My internal predator was dying, rotted out. She weaponized your bloodline to fix me, to artificially resurrect my power. Vora turned her head. A morning light caught the gold in her eyes. I was a biological battery. She didn't blink. A disposable energy source in a marble cage. Alaric reached across the space between them. His calloused palm cupped the sharp angle of her jaw. His thumb dragged slowly across her cold skin. I was an arrogant fool, he said. He leaned closer. The wind whipped off the water, but his focus was entirely on her. But I saw your fire. I memorized your scars. You are my equal, Vora. She didn't pull away. Slowly, just a fraction of an inch, She let the weight of her head rest against his palm. A sharp, uneven breath hitched in her throat. That slight shift in weight sent adrenaline crashing through his ribs. "I don't care about dead magic," Alaric said. He kept his voice low, firm. "I choose you, not as a weapon, as my queen." Vora's hands shot out. She grabbed the ruined collar of his shirt and dragged him down. Their mouths collided. It was a brutal clash of teeth and desperate heat, tasting of sea salt and rain. Alaric wrapped his arms around her waist, pulling her flush against his chest. He anchored her there. She kissed him back with feral aggression, her teeth catching his bottom lip. The cold sand, the Queen Mother's lies, the ghosts of the underground. They burned away in the friction. Vora finally pulled back. Her chest heaved. A slow, dangerous smirk curved her lips. "Keep up, Your Highness," she murmured. Her forehead dropped heavily against his collarbone. "Ruling this city is going to take a lot of spilled blood." A low rumble vibrated in Alaric's chest. The sound carried in the quiet morning. "Let them bleed." He dragged his knuckles down the side of her throat, feeling the steady beat of her pulse. He would burn the rest of the world to ash before he let anyone cage her again.